Disruptors and curious minds, welcome to another episode of Thinking on Paper. My name is Jeremy Gilbertson. With me is Mark Fielding. Mark, good day to you, sir. How are things in your world?
Hello, good. In a very unemerging tech development, a combine harvester has just pulled up outside my window and started, I don't know doing what. So if you can hear a lot of noise, it's a combine harvester. I'm very well. I've had a very painful week, actually.
That's what I heard. Yeah.
I've
The
torn.
physical the physical world is dangerous. We'll be talking about the digital one today, but tell me what
Yeah,
happened.
well, no, I've torn a muscle in my chest, and I'm under a sea of painkillers and muscle relaxants. So if I'm incoherent, it's the drugs.
Oh, so maybe it's not an internet lag. Maybe it's like a medical induced lag.
Yeah, it
Either
could
I
be
don't know.
a slow cerebellum. Am I on a delay still? Is it echoing?
There's no echo in it, just like the voice. I think the voice is ahead of the video, but no worries, dude. We got you. Well, let's do this. So I hope your physical ailments start to get better. Just got to stop doing those weighted pull-ups, and that will keep your chest from tearing. So I want to introduce Mark. You know, we don't do this very often, and we do a terrible job of telling our own stories. I'll be perfectly candid, even though we're both writers and creators and all of that, but Mark is a very talented writer and a guy that can kind of pull together technical things in a really interesting and fun way. He's actually got a book out there called Apocalypse Daddy, right? If I'm
Yeah,
correct, is that the right name?
correct. Yeah.
So he's got a very interesting point of view on raising kids and translating things to that regard. But Mark's been a great partner of mine to kind of unpack and make sense of all the tech that's coming out and how it applies to how it applies to all of us as humans. So he's been a great partner and innovator, and he writes for a lot of outlets. And if you are in need of a writer who synthesizes some amazing things, I would highly encourage you checking out Mr. Fielding. Mark, super glad to have you. Um,
Thank you. Is this? So it's my turn to introduce Jeremy, my co-host of Thinking on Paper, and for the second week in a row, Jeremy is putting me on the spot. So the man, the myth, the legend that is Jeremy Gilbertson, a builder and futurist, specializing in, as far as I'm aware, specializing in music and tech and the intersection of culture, which you use that to guide brand strategy on embracing with specific musical speciality on emerging tech. If I'm correct on that. But he's also a writer like me, who's your work. So you say I work for a lot of outlets. Your work's appeared in Variety and Forbes. I can't get anywhere near that. So yeah, he's a writer, and you're the founder and CEO of Right. No, hold on. What's it called? Right to Know You. That's
there you
correct.
go. Yes, sir.
You use writing to help people find their inner self.
That's
Is it to find their inner self? Is that the right way to describe Right to Know You?
we might be able to put Elizabeth on the spot because she has good experience with Right to Know You, but
Oh,
that is
brilliant.
that
Let's do that.
that is definitely a part of it. Well, with that, we now have another introduction we need to make, and I also want to welcome again one of our new streaming platforms, Kick. Hello out there on Kick if you're listening. It's an amazing new streaming platform where creators are actually they're reinventing the monetization for creators on that platform as well too, which is why we're excited to be there. So hello, Kick, and good morning if you're in the States. So our guest today, super excited. We're talking about digital experiences. Dare we say metaverse? You know, metaverse is kind of coming in and out. I think even Roblox is trying to shed their metaverse nomenclature, but we can even call it digital experiences. So our guest, Elizabeth Strickler, who I've known for quite a long time and has been another partner in crime to unpack technology and figure out how it applies. We've riffed together on a bunch of different things, but she's the director of media and entrepreneurship at the Creative Media Industries Institute at Georgia State University. She has a very interesting background in philosophy, computer science, and filmmaking, which is amazing. Interdisciplinary expert here. And you may recognize her face from a famous April 2021 TED Talk when this whole Web3 stuff started coming out. It was a great way to help people tiptoe into what the hell all this stuff is. So without further ado, I am going to bring on our amazing guest, Elizabeth. How are you?
Great. Hi. Hi, Mark and Jeremy. Thank you all for letting me come on and just have this, I hope, engaging conversation. And just like to follow on with the right to know you. Yes. And education. And immersive education. I'll just follow on. I did do the Right to Know You program with Jeremy, which is where you write physically. And I think it's very interesting because we're talking about digital and physical, and this is a good way to sort of kick it off. He asked that you write for 10 minutes a day and then take a photo of that and post it on Discord to show that you did that every day. But I pushed him a little bit and asked if I could write but using my iPad, but using Nebo, which is like a handwriting. And that actually really pushed me into a new format of writing because I could write in script, but on this giant kind of digital whiteboard and then draw and mix it all together. And I'm not a writer. I mostly do speaking, and I mean, I write, but I prefer kind of speaking and video and live conversations. And so it was incredibly helpful to me because at the end of the week, you put together what you have written on a Sunday. You just, put it together. And I had some fun things that I wrote. One, which was called "Are We Meta Fucked?" Sorry, I'm not sure if they're allowed to say that.
Oh, no, but we encourage swearing.
Okay, well, because I was just like, so one of my sayings is everything in the real world will be recreated in the virtual world. And I feel like, I mean, just even having to dress my avatar is like a whole nother body that I got to take care of.
Do we want to take all of those things, all that baggage in, so to speak?
I know.
Right?
Yeah. Anyway, so that was just my intro. But great, one of the great things about education is that interactive experiences and peer review and peer-to-peer learning has been proven to be one of the best ways to learn. And Jeremy really embraced that and embraces that in his Right to Know You program.
Super kind, Elizabeth. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much for that. Shayna, welcome. Good to see you in the chat. I'm sure we'll get some good knowledge nuggets from Elizabeth on this. But Elizabeth, let's start with this interesting thread of philosophy, computer science, and filmmaking. And because I think the world as it sits right now, almost rewards specialists, right? Especially if you're trying to get into a system that needs a particular specialist. Now that sounds extremely interdisciplinary. How have you been able to weave a through line between those three things to the awesome stuff you're doing today?
Well, I really don't exactly know. I mean, curiosity is sort of what drives me. So that's why I just sort of, embrace all the different, new things that just inspire me to keep learning and going down rabbit holes. But, a lot of times people talk about the T, which is the broad sort of knowledge versus the deep knowledge. And I think that if you've got deep knowledge in one thing, it's a lot easier to go broad and kind of apply some of that depth to whatever new thing that you learn. But when I reflect on my, where I am now, which, I don't even know where I am now. But one thing that I think was super valuable to me was that I got an undergraduate degree in philosophy. I mean, that was okay. Then, it was good. I was a curious, young person, but I went into social work and that was super hard. And then I wanted to be a teacher. And when I came back to teach in math, I got into computer science, and the internet. And I got my first job as an internet, service provider, Mindspring, which was way back in the day. But that was just trial by fire. I learned so much about technology and the internet. And that, honestly, that base layer, I think, has been what's enabled me to just learn new things so quickly and just have a super strong technical background so that I can understand things, but still I've got that humanities approach to life. So I'm not a tech bro, partially because I'm not a bro, but but because I also have the humanities component to the whole thing. So I don't know if that answers the question.
I think that's an important piece of the whole puzzle is not only the humanity side, but how tech applies to humanities and how the human condition can benefit and also be hurt by technology, right? Mm-hmm. So it's that's super interesting as a foundation. Really quickly, I want to welcome Pico Velasquez in the chat, our guest from last week. That was amazing. Mm-hmm. Pico, hope all is well in Tulum. Thanks for joining us. Elizabeth,
she's probably somewhere else by now.
That's highly possible. And Dixie's in the chat. Hi, Dixie. Welcome. Elizabeth, when we were talking in our little pre-pro chat, you mentioned a recent course that you took, speaking of the intersection between the human condition and technology, that I think would be really interesting for our listeners to hear and understand some of the outputs and how you structured it. So tell us about that course.
Yeah. It's not a course I took. It's a course I taught, but I took it too because it was basically whenever I teach, I teach in order to learn. I mean, that's the beauty of teaching. And so I had this idea. So I teach, which is interesting. I teach in the Creative Media Industries Institute, but I also teach in the business school at Georgia State. So they asked for me to put together a combo class that is, innovative. So this one I did was called Self and Community in the Metaverse. And I got 24 very courageous students who had no prereqs whatsoever. So they didn't have to have any technical skills or even interest in the metaverse or anything. And we also did it as a research project to understand if learning emerging technologies, in this case, particularly augmented and virtual reality, and with some AI thrown in, would give you more agency in your own life and also have more hope for your community in the future. So that was the sort of the research question. But basically what we did was we broke the class down into, first of all, what is self? And then so we did avatars. Now I would like to talk about how we did, reflecting on what self is and what it means to represent yourself. And then we did what is personal space or private space. And then we, that might be me, that might be the garbage can in the background.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So we did what is self, then what is sort of private personal space, and then what is community in a virtual world or in a metaverse, and how might we approach that? So that's what we did in the class, and it was very, very interesting. We had some we had some great learnings and a lot of frustration. And I think that this is this is the trajectory that many people have when they're trying to create digital experiences or virtual experiences, and where some of the resonance is, which is the good stuff, and where some of the just really hard friction is and the bad stuff.
Could you expand on that friction and frustration?
Yeah, well, so like, when we did the avatars, so we did this whole thing where first I just gave the students a pencil and a paper, and I said, create. I didn't want to say self, because whenever you say like draw yourself, just all sorts of ego and it just comes in and fear and whatever. So we just said, create a character that you would like to navigate virtual worlds. So they drew it. Then we gave them Ready Player Me, and we said, create a character that would, travel through virtual worlds. Then we got MetaHuman. And if you've ever used MetaHuman by Unreal, everything had to be web-based or, pretty easy to use because this was not going to be a deep tools class. So then they used MetaHuman. And then we reflected on what it means to represent yourself, and are you representing your outer self or your inner self? Well, and then we used Midjourney to kind of create aspirational sort of avatars. So we reflected on all of that, like what does it mean to take your human self in flesh and blood and then represent it as a digital entity.
Was there a preference for I don't know how this worked, but for the Ready Player Me avatar, which is a more animated avatar, and the MetaHuman, which is like a photorealistic representation of a human face?
Yeah.
Did that affect the students at all?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we had huge, long conversations about it. One of the things that you all might not know about Georgia State University is that we're one of the most diverse universities in the United States. So, at least 50%, I don't know the percentage precisely, but over 50% of my students are Black. And so immediately you get into the hairstyles and the choices of colors versus representation of your skin, the choices of clothing that you can wear. But we also, one of the things that I got the students to talk about was not just as a user, but assuming that many of these students will actually be creators and maybe even creators of companies at some point in time. So you can't just give infinite choice if you're going to have the rigging work properly, if you're going to be able to go on to the different platforms. So people loved messing with MetaHuman, but the frustration and the friction there is that it's really hard to get the image to look really like yourself. But second of all, Ready Player Me, you could create an avatar and jump into 40 different applications with that ready to go. And so the usability of it was tremendous.
Yeah, I want to kind of go back a little bit to this group of 24 amazing students, and I want to understand what their level of familiarity with digital experiences, Web3, the metaverse. If you could put like percentages and say like 20% were super familiar, 20% were not, how would you break that down just from a high level? I'm curious.
Yeah, I would say that I had some students who were, had used some game engine stuff before or done some animations before or made films before. And I had probably 2 to 3 students who had dealt with cryptocurrency to some degree or another, but their understanding of Web3 or decentralized web or the term metaverse was super minimal, which was really surprising to me.
So would you say the level of frustration due to just how to use the tech and the pieces and the parts, was that part of it where they struggled, or?
No, not so much, because one thing I'd like to do shout out is I had a whole team of people at Georgia State helping me design the course. So it was well designed. I mean, when we said to use Ready Player Me, we were in the classroom at computers with step-by-step instructions on every single thing that they were to do. So to the degree that their level of frustration, I mean, to get onto MetaHuman and play with it, they knew how to do all the things. To get a person to look, to get that to look like yourself, that takes an incredible amount of artistry and time. And, but they had all the access to the tech was not a problem. We made sure of that.
How did they navigate the initial experiences with avatars? And the reason why I asked this question, I remember a long time ago, I can't even remember how far long ago, but it was back when, alt space was kind of one of the first, outside of Second Life and a bunch of other things, right? I jumped into alt space and went in, and I noticed like people were interacting very differently than like if the three of us were in a room, because if the three of us were in alt space and I didn't know you, I was like, there were people like literally walking right up in my face, and like, you're just like, there are very different ways to navigate. I guess because there's less repercussions in
Can I
the
just
digital.
like that's for people who are listening, they should watch the last week's episode with Pico, because that cultural interaction was part of what she was saying about building these virtual worlds, and how do you build for that interaction.
So that is a great segue, because like I told you, we did self, then personal private space, and then community space. So one of the things that we anticipated was exactly what you're talking about, Jeremy. When you spawn, which means when you just suddenly appear into a new world, you need a gradation. You need to do your makeup, or whatever. You need to brush your hair, like check the mirror, gird up yourself, whatever. So like one of the things we did was we had each of them create spaces, kind of like a private space, a personal space, a room that would be their space that they would invite other people into, but it was their private, personal, comfortable space to put their avatar in. So, great segue for that. So that was the next step in the class, was just creating those spaces. And for that, we used spatial.io, if y'all have ever played with that. And so they went into spatial.io and you can use a lot of the pre-done stuff. But we also taught them, the ones that were, a little bit more excited and advanced, how to use Polycan LiDAR scan. So you could LiDAR scan some things or some places and pull that into spatial. Now, that's where you get into the technical, this is all of this. Your imagination is so much better than what your capabilities are. And so that's where there's certainly a lot of frustration. I think that's where the frustration with the metaverse is in general right now.
So real quick clarification for the listeners and viewers that aren't familiar with LiDAR scanning and all of that. It just, simply put, and correct me if I'm wrong, is a way of capturing kind of a real life asset and translating that from data points into a digital asset or a likeness, right?
Yeah. I mean, as this class is happening, and this is the case for all teaching nowadays, for all learning, whatever, is that you pick, you have the months before the class starts, you kind of need to start picking your tools and picking how you're going to teach it, and getting familiar with it yourself. And the thing is, this stuff is just coming out and changing like every minute. And then plus on top of that, AI was coming out, and AI that are the power tools to the metaverse, in my opinion, because instead of having to just, very soon, instead of having to use, where did y'all go?
We're here.
Sorry.
We're here.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
My screen just disappeared. So instead of using MetaHuman to sculpt, the face, you'll just be able to take your phone, LiDAR scan your face, and create, the avatar, the perfect representation, if you want to represent yourself in a totally, photoreal kind of thing. So anyway, that was a huge frustration, and it continues to be. And like, so then I think to sort of kind of riff on that again, next we created community. And, Mark, you were talking about how Pico talked about sort of the culture of the space. One of the things that we wanted to do with community was write out kind of like a constitution or a rules of engagement that were agreed upon with these 24 students, because, this creating worlds is like God, and you're all of a sudden like new groups of people trying to align, like what is the behavior that is desired. So the context within which we used was the university. So we decided, how might we recreate the university experience, not the university, right? Because it's so ridiculous when you see people who want to recreate a university and then they've got these like brick buildings with white columns and really super boring rooms with rows of seats and,
big oak lecterns with like brass lights on the top. If you're
yeah.
old enough, the overhead projectors with the sheets. Yeah, right. No, I'm just kidding.
You don't need seats when you're studying astrology. You don't need to be in a building. You need to be in space.
Yeah. Yeah. And all of us, the thing is that, but you've got to have something that's familiar enough to know what to do and what's the purpose and the point. So, but also that doesn't have all the physical constraints. You don't have gravity, and you don't have, materials that can't be duplicated and replicated all over the place. So that was a really interesting, and I would have spent more time on this, which was we went through and we just did these like massive design thinking sprints where we were thinking, what happens in a university? So they wrote down, having coffee, having lunch, sitting in classes, studying, being on a computer, one-on-ones with your teacher. We just wrote down all of this. And then as in groups, they picked 6 different experiences to recreate in a virtual world, but that was the experience and not the physicality.
It's really interesting. The two things that my mind goes to, and I love the thoughtful process that you put together for this, right? And the gradated experience of getting into something, right? And I think about this like, for those of us that work from home, it's really difficult to go from work mode into, like, if you have kids, parent mode, right? And I always found ways to get, find 6 or 7 minutes to have that little decompression before I got into change states, right? So when we're going from physical to digital, there's a bit of a state change. And I think having that landing zone is really interesting and seeing how that expands, but then also having these overall community guidelines and rules to govern the overall experience. I have a question related to the second piece of that. And how did you ever get into a situation where you or the community was put in a position to enforce one of the rules, and how did that go?
Yeah, we did a little bit, which is on our first try with a group of students. What we did was we got one of our learning management or our learning team to create the first sort of lobby or we wanted to have sort of a central point where everybody would spawn, and then they would go off into these different worlds that were made by the students. And so when our learning management team kind of built that world in spatial, I was like, well, they need something to do. That's the biggest problem when you get, into these virtual worlds, especially like spatial. Like, what do you do? So they had a little go find all of the panther sculptures. They had hidden some sculptures, so it was a little bit of a just go find those panthers. And he did not make the world private. And so all sorts of new people started spawning in there and doing crazy stuff. And it was first of all, it was weighing down the system, but they were, speaking in foreign languages, and, also they were drawing and messing with stuff that he didn't realize he had to lock down. So they were like making things. So we kind of had to, talk about that and what was, appropriate, but we really never got to the point where we had to enforce stuff because we just didn't use the worlds, and there was too much. There wasn't enough time. I could imagine that we would get to that point because in class we did have to have plenty of those kinds of things where I have to say, this is a time where you're not to be talking about politics, or this is actually, would you please stay until the end of class? Or, would you please not have private conversations while we're having a group conversation so we can all hear each other? So, same kinds of things happen in virtual worlds, but that happened more in the real world. Yeah. But so, yeah. You might have some questions. I'll let you go ahead, Mark. You seem like you have a question.
Well, I was just wondering if you'd finished that train of thought, what your goal was for self and community in the metaverse? Like what was your goal when you set out, and did you
Right.
achieve what you wanted to set out? Was it a success?
Yeah, well, so the final part of it was that when they went to go build their worlds, so another thing is we taught them Blender, a little bit of Blender, because Blender has all the ethos that I love about Web3 and decentralized. It's an open source, 3D modeling and world building tool. So we taught them that. They loved that. And we used a lot of online tutorials and all that sort of thing. But then the final part was we wanted to decide whether to build in spatial, but it's not a decentralized platform. So you all might know Stu Richards. So Stu, MetaMike, AKA MetaMike.
Oh,
Oh, yeah.
MetaMike, yeah.
MetaMike.
MetaMike.
MetaMike came and he and I back and forth, we decided to create their final worlds in HyperFi. So the thing about HyperFi is that is a fully Web3 platform where you have to have a MetaMask wallet, but you don't have to. So he loaned us his world, so we rented the space. So he loaned us those because they're around $150 per space.
Real quick, did a smart contract govern that agreement?
Yeah, totally. The whole thing.
Cool.
So they learned just enough about owning your own data, creating these, and they were like, why do you have to pay for a platform, pay for a piece of property? And I'm like, because otherwise spatial owns everything of yours, So we had a great community, conversation around all of that. So we used HyperFi. It's a still, emerging product. And it was hard and there was lots of difficulties and all of that, but it still was great learning and all of that. And so Mark, to your point, was it a success? Well, they all got a class. I think they learned a lot and they got A's, B's, or C's. And I mean, so as far as my job and what their learning was, yes, it was a success. The question about the main core question was, do you feel like you have more agency in your world? And do you have more hope for your community, however you define that in the future? Where I failed at that was that I started bringing AI in and it was freaking them out in so many ways. And that was where I feel like I didn't quite solve that problem.
That's a hard puzzle to pull in, especially when, but you can't not leave it out. I do it all the time. Like I was like, okay, and this, because it's eventually going to be connected. But that, speaking to your success rate of this, Elizabeth, both Shayna and Dixie in the chat said they wish they had this course when they were in college. So I would put that on the success bucket.
Well, I wish I could teach this class, and when I say teach, I am definitely like a collaborative, person who sort of just guides a group of people towards some new kinds of learnings and knowledge. And so, I would like to do this again. As a matter of fact, we've actually proposed the avatar activity for South by Southwest EDU to just kind of do a quick workshop, with them. But I think that, the students were frustrated and complaining a little bit, but afterwards, they're like, wow. One of my students created a company and she created, she figured out how to make glasses using 3D rendering. She didn't know anything about any of this. And she and her sister are starting a company specifically for people who have eye problems. So she created all these 3D glasses and she's now in the, Main Street Entrepreneurship. She got accepted to a prestigious at Georgia State program. So that was great. Another one is working in our makerspace and now doing 3D scanning and then 3D printing. It has just like gotten way into Blender and doing all of that. So, as long as you never know what kind of impact you have as far as that goes.
How does that feel, Elizabeth, to know that you're sparking creativity and you're helping people push the boundaries? How does that feel?
I mean, I think that like just doing this, like having conversations with people is, I think most of us want to teach and learn from each other. It's like, I think that's really what most of us sort of want to do. And, there's other things we want to do, but I think this a superhuman desire. And it feels great. And I recommend that everybody teach or tutor or do something, share. We mostly want to share our knowledge and resonate with other people and then have that done back to us. So it feels good. That's one thing, like when people have a crisis of confidence about their jobs, teaching often doesn't, have so much of a crisis of confidence. If you feel like I always feel guilty that I'm not doing as much as I possibly could, but yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Well-
You teach, Jeremy. I just being aware of time as we are. Do you mind if I move the conversation to so your TEDx talk with 2 million views on the metaverse, and as you said earlier, NFTs that got a lot of interest a year ago. In it, you speak about, I think you say that students are building the metaverse as we speak. And it got me thinking about, and I think we've spoken about this, Jeremy, you and I, and Web3 kind of represents this top down, bottom up collaboration. And for me, you're almost saying that students are building the curriculum or helping to build the curriculum and the spaces themselves. Now, it's been a long time since I went to university, but when I was at university, and it wasn't a very good university, the students had no input on anything to do with anything that was happening at the university. Are you suggesting that now and in the future that the secondary education will be a collaboration between students and lecturers and professors?
Oh yeah. So I actually, there's two different kinds of things going on. When I talk about my class specifically, like if I do a presentation on the class, particularly for education conferences and stuff like that, I talk about decentralized teaching, because one of the things that is so irksome to me is that what other industry do you let one person determine all of the content and then privately on their own, just with the users, deliver the content and have no other feedback from their peers on best practices or ways you might change it or new ideas. So that alone, so I had a group of people helping and working with me. But yes, I think that I always give the students ways to give feedback. I always make the students present or teach some component. So each of these students had to think of a online community that had true cultural meaning to them. And I don't care if it's, whatever it was. And so they had to get up in front of the class and talk about that community and what was important to them, and then teach. I have them teach. If they have a special knowledge, I always have them teach. So yeah, for sure. It's been, and that's a trend in all of education now, Mark, is definitely lots of, end user feedback, but it's that decentralized model that we're all pushing for in Web3 for kind of everything.
Excellent.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to our patented thinking on paper, bidirectional value exchange concept that all this tech can do. And speaking of which, Elizabeth, what are some of the most, like a couple of the either great questions that these students asked or super interesting insights or what ifs? Like what were some of the good nuggets coming from them to you?
So, a lot of, for the avatar stuff, it was a lot about representation and what is representation and self-representation and how can you represent yourself. So we had lots of discussions in that realm. There was a lot of stuff about why the metaverse, this is a sucky technology. It doesn't work well. It's just, it's lagging behind in what I've got in my imagination and how to create stuff. And it's too complicated. And, but some people that inspired them and pushed them to want to go towards, Blender and then Unreal Engine and all of that. And others, they were like, I don't like this and I don't want to do this. And, so there was that. But I think, how do we communicate when we're not in person was just a big question. I still think it's a big question. One of the things that I talk about the industrial metaverse, the social metaverse, and the enterprise metaverse. But the industrial metaverse is digital twinning and making, replicant, or real hardcore training, like, fixing a airplane engine. Social metaverse is gaming, things like that. But like, when you're trying to collaborate or work together or learn together, that metaverse is still, I don't know where it's at. It's just not here yet. And we're still trying to kind of figure that out. And they were trying to kind of help grapple with that. That was a big question. And then owning your own data. They really loved the whole Web3 owning your own data. It's a hard concept to get your head around. That's why I really wanted to go in the hyperfi and talk about owning the content and all of that. So, and then AI, art, and who owns the art, and what is an artist, and all of that. Those are the big questions.
Yeah, the identity thing is really interesting, and in owning your data. There's a lot of folks out there. Lamina One, I know, is a blockchain that's hyper focused on identity, especially as of late, what they're releasing in subsequent white papers, or light papers rather. But I think that's an interest that I'm curious to see when that's actually going to come along. But I think it's a confluence of a few different things. It's number one, it's the security versus convenience seesaw, right? So I use the analogy of Waze before. I use Waze and it helps me, navigate traffic, get around things. It's super convenience, right? But they see where I go, when I go there, why I'm going there. Maybe they extrapolate, right? So I'm giving them that. So there's that seesaw, but there's also like, how easy is it for me to manage and flip on and off access streams to my data? And I think, do you see that as kind of what are the keys to that becoming more of a mainstream occurrence?
I mean, my guess is as good as yours. And I think you just described it really, really well, which is, convenience versus, being the product and offering your data. Some people think that platforms should be illegal, so this just the idea of a platform, is, and I just kind of keep trying to think about the real world and how we kind of function in our own world, and where we have public spaces and private spaces and homes, and but I think that it's going to be a long process to that, because we always choose convenience and ease.
It's a powerful drug.
Yeah.
We've got a great question from Warren in the chat to Elizabeth. What are Elizabeth's thoughts on job opportunities for neurodiverse individuals building the open metaverse, especially as lots of developers and gaming creatives are so prolific in the space? What are you seeing out there related to that?
I mean, I think that neurodiversity is, a key component to how we build these worlds. We need different perspectives from all kinds of people. And also, because of the different ways that people can work and the different tool sets that are available, I think that there's an opportunity for so many different people to help build, whether we're talking about building 3D worlds or building 3D, building experiences. I think that's great. I also think that AI is, the ability to to much more individualize your learning through, artificial intelligence, either by way of tutor or conversant, partner, or whatever it might be, really gets away from that. Education is antiquated in the fact that we have this industrial, first grader, second grader, third grader, who has a third grade knowledge of whatever. That's such a strange thing. You have a Jeremy knowledge of whatever, and Jeremy's path, which is his story, through the world, is completely different to myself, even though we might be like the same age or whatever it might be. What is that? So I think that diversity, I feel like we're not even diverse enough in our diversity kind of talk. We're all so unique and diverse, and AI really helps us kind of, is going to be very helpful in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me on the soapbox of industrialized education that hasn't
Okay.
changed
No,
since the 1800s. I mean, you know, it translates into this going back. It's a theme, Mark. You and I, we need to write a book on this. I think the theme of hierarchical versus emergent systems as it relates to tech and society, because we feel the need as humans to organize things in order to scale them, right, and get them out. They have to be kind of organized in a way that's digestible for larger audiences, that larger audiences can kind of come in and out of. But we're also different in how we get to passive creating and paths to scaling. I don't know. I'm with you 100%, Elizabeth. I think it's this whole space is prime for reinvention with some of this tech that's out there. Mark, what's on your mind? I've been talking a lot, as always.
I totally agree with you on the educational 18th century doomed model of education, which I do think is changing slowly. I want to ask a question on behalf of my daughter and my son, who are 4 and 7, and who know, hopefully they'll go to university one day. Well, I've got 3 questions actually. What do you think their university experience will be like in terms of will it be a hybrid model? Will they spend a lot of time in virtual worlds? Do you think, obviously it might depend on what subjects they choose to do. What do you want to do next? And because no one else has asked it, could you talk about your room that you're in when you finish, please?
So, you know, I think that, you know, definitely not going to a place every day, all day is definitely going to happen. So remote, but I think that we're in this space of like, what is better in person and what is better, you know, virtually. And then again, convenience. I would rather be in a room with all 3 of you right now. I mean, all 2 of you right now. And, you know, but we can't do that. And this is 1 hour and this is great. We can make this happen. And this is wonderful. I was just at a conference in Finland, and I was supposed to give a remote presentation from Atlanta, but then they said, well, why don't you come here? I got to go to the 3 days of the Futures Conference and meet all these people. It was totally way different than if I had just done this online presentation. But we're still kind of trying to figure out those kinds of things. Again, convenience. And I think there'll be luxury that people, I think in person will be luxury in a lot of ways. So we'll kind of see that. Your second question was,
What do you want to do next? What's your
what do I want?
next lesson? Your next
so
path?
I'm super excited about Amosite is a new education platform that's incorporating AI and virtual and gaming and social media, but not sharing data and all of that. So I'm really interested in like disrupting education. That is super interesting to me. But I think in the fall, I'm going to take a group of students to the aquarium in Atlanta and have them reimagine digital experiences, virtual experiences that they can pitch as prototypes to the aquarium. So that's a super fun thing. They've got some problems where they've got bottlenecks of certain areas, and then they don't have repeat local visitors. So I want to kind of take this learnings and do that. Yeah. And then the room is, so we built this before the pandemic. It was a garage. And I was like, why? We don't even care about cars. Why are we even make a garage? And so the pandemic came. And so this is like the ultimate flexible space. It's my studio. You can see we've got yoga mats. It's the workout room. It's my VR room. We've got painting over here. So it's a garage. I also love plants and skeletons.
On a bike. It looks brilliant.
And my son's bike, because he's home from college.
Awesome.
So one quick comment on the you know, what's digital, what's physical, and all of that kind of stuff. I think as humans in general, we do a really good job of coming together in physical situations for marquee moments. A marquee moment could be you know, meeting of like minds. A marquee moment could be a protest that is combating some form of injustice. But what happens is these marquee moments, we come together, and then it kind of fizzles out because it's hard to come together. It's hard to bring energy to something like what I'm calling a marquee moment. But, what if this digital layer kind of works as an extension and bridge between marquee moments to keep momentum on great things, whether it's an injustice, combating an injustice, whether it's education, whether it's, mind share, whatever it is. So that's, I just thought I'd share. That's my mindset on the balance of that.
Well, I just want to add one quick thing to that. I know it's time is up, but I use Discord when I teach. And so still, it's not, an immersive platform, but it is a juicy to keep the class. So when I create a class, it's always creating a community. So for that, 4 months, it's a community that we come together and trying to figure out how to create, and mostly I teach online. So trying to create a community. So Discord, and that's why I think we're seeing the rise in all of that, juicy conversational space. And I hope that it can become more immersive, but yeah, you're totally right.
Well, in the aspect that I teach as well with the Right to Know You program, in fact, the one that you were part, we use Discord, and I've used a bunch of different other platforms as well to facilitate it and organize this community that was, over 5 weeks. But remember at the end when we got together, like for the first time in that one group, that was like super profound. That felt like really awesome, right?
It did.
After building in digital land. But well, hey, Elizabeth, it's always such a pleasure to talk to you. Your energy, your ideas, the things you're experimenting with, and the results of those experiments are so well organized and thoughtful, and can help all of us do a lot of great things. Focusing on the reinvention of education is amazing. If viewers out there, if you haven't watched Elizabeth's TED Talk, Mark does some great write-ups at the end of these shows. We'll be sure to include a lot of the links, maybe some of the stuff that you built, these worlds that you built with this last class, if those are shareable. We'd love to see that. And as far as Thinking on Paper goes, we are up on Spotify, YouTube, and Kick as well, that new platform. If you missed an episode or you haven't been able to check out the old ones, Pico Velasquez was a last guest. It was a wonderful talk as well. But we have some exciting.
Don't forget the newsletter, thinkingonpaper.xyz, and they can sign up and they get all, because there was a lot of links in this episode, and I think some of them will be fascinating to see. A lot of tools, a lot of links. So go to Thinking on Paper XYZ and they'll get a full breakdown.
And we have a couple of wonderful updates that we're able to share probably in a week or so. One is related to some special partnerships that we are working on for Thinking on Paper, and we have an episode that we're going to do with a lot of our previous guests that should be really, really interesting in form of a kind of a town hall, so to speak. So stay tuned for all that. My name's Jeremy. That's Mark.
My name's Mark.
That's Mark. He's battling a combine harvester today. Good luck with your chest recuperation. Elizabeth, thanks for your time and energy. See you soon, everybody. Bye.
Thank y'all.
Next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.